Yeah, it's cool because like I'm dancing now in ceremony, and like I'm not supposed to wear like a shirt. So I wear a vest, but I'm like maybe this might be that's something to say. You got a good English. Well done. All areas covered. That's what I said. I said that's probably a good thing.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, especially on a rainy night. And also a huge thanks to Eric and Bird and Beckett for letting us be here. They did a lot. So tonight we're going to have 3 readers read, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back and have 2 readers read and do a short Q&A. So if questions come up as people are reading, also to folks who are joining us on Zoom, you can ask questions. Keep them in mind, and then you can ask at the end. So this is a reading of writers who took part in Parakeet, which is, a year-long writing program that is less about like focusing on developing your craft and more on just getting your ass in the chair and getting the work done. It gave us a lot of structure. So everything from accountability partners to monthly meetings to high volume word counts just to get the books done. And so everyone tonight will be reading from works that they've been working on for about a year, almost a year. We're almost done. Yeah. So big congratulations to all the parakeets. All right, and we're going to get started with Sarah McColl. Sarah McColl is the author of the memoir Joy Enough. She also writes Lost Art, a monthly newsletter about the creative work of mostly dead women, and is a 2023 finalist for the Andy Warhol Arts Writers Grant. She lives in small town Northern California. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi. Okay. This is kind of like a weird, I'm a short person. So is this okay if I stand here? It sounds all right? Okay. So I did the one thing you're not supposed to do, which was that I started one book and then midstream I switched to another one. So this is my second Parakeet project, but I finished it. I finished a draft. And what you need to know is that it's a novel. This is from the beginning. And a music journalist, a young music journalist, has found an album from 1994 in present day. So it's 2024. And she loves it. She falls in love with it, but she can't find anything else about the artist. And then finally she finds her. She's been living on a remote, unbridged island off the coast of Maine. And the artist says, well, come for the weekend and you can interview me and I'll tell you about what happened. So this is after she's arrived at the island and the artist starts telling the story. Okay. My album dropped, a term I've never cared for, in June of 1994. I was 24 with racehorse legs, wet, doleful eyes, and a voice like dawn's first light. What reason had I not to hope? Every Tuesday, when tied, heavy bundles of new periodicals landed on the sidewalk outside of the East Village magazine store, likely long out of business by now, I left Robert naked in bed, slipped on my sneakers, and walked from my apartment near Tompkins Square to find out if I was famous yet. Each week might be the last I could pass the curbside garbage in such blissful anonymity. I was the thrill of a secret about to surface. Dogs lifted their legs, piss streamed off plastic and snaked across the sidewalk. Bar doors were already cracked and open. Regulars slumped on stools. Last night's booze and vomit unmasked by bleach. The city was never scrubbed clean, which was what I loved in the beginning. The freedom to make mistakes without notice. I bought the same stack every week, a $60 glossy tower. In early July, a cashier asked if I was doing research. He wore a black button pinned to his paisley vest. Weird for art, it said. Sort of, I said, trying to find out what's cool. That's your first mistake, he said, and thrust my receipt in a bag. The 10-minute walk home, light-footed with longing, lit up the rest of my week. My tote bag dug into my shoulder. How devoted the world was to the perpetuation of beauty, even the tight-fisted bodega daffodils, the indefatigable carnations, garish blue, toxic pink. For several blocks, I believed in honest effort and just rewards, that my life still had the possibility of proceeding in the manner I anticipated. Robert would be gone from the apartment by my return. At the studio, his post-it said. Any day now, I would learn he meant Lily's studio, or Lily's bedroom, with its pretty morning light above the striped awning of an Italian cafe. Lily, my former best friend. They fucked, they smoked, they drank exceptionally good espresso. Bella, the waiter said, che piacere. I dumped the contents of my tote on the coffee table. Kurt Cobain was dead, but Courtney Love still wanted a whore from hell to play decent bass with fuck you written on her tits. Grit fell from speakers. Vitriol and rage stirred the zeitgeist. I sang about trumpet vines and coffee cups. The difference was supposed to be part of my appeal. In mid-July, the publicist said we hadn't hit our groove yet. I'd been bumped from the Late Show twice. The publicist scheduled another photo shoot. At a photographer's studio in the Flatiron, a makeup artist drew long, swooping black lines across my eyelids. Brigitte Bardot, right? You're going for like 60s chanteuse? That was part of my problem. I wasn't going for anything. The publicist called me Anna Karina meets Joni Mitchell. The style of French New Wave meets the sincerity of American folk. Didn't it all speak for itself? Sure, I told the makeup artist. Yes. A wardrobe assistant handed me a black leather miniskirt and a black ribbed turtleneck. I stood before a white backdrop, and they trained a fan on me. I could shine it on when necessary, of course, which the label loved, and helped stoke their belief. The photographer, a lanky blonde man, sprawled on the floor and trained his camera up at me. Power stance, he commanded. Was this power? I felt like a mountain. Any day now I would survey the view from the peak, wave joyfully at the tiny fans down below. But when the photo appeared in New York Magazine, my earthy mountain power didn't read. The stylist had put me in red panties, and the visual message popped. I was oblique and indistinct, a wash of black, save for my pussy. By early August, I could no longer reach my publicist. Then, the Tuesday, unlike all the others, arrived, when I found what I hadn't been looking for. Nursery rhymes, the critics said. Bucolic bedtime stories best kept in the playroom. Even Divya's childlike, ethereal beauty can't save these songs from cloying toothache material. The magazines echoed in chorus. Twee, folk failure, pastoral navel-gazing. At my kitchen table in Maine, the sun low, almost gone, and the familiar room warm with gold light, I discovered the half-life of these assessments still burning within me. Colleen's eyes were peeled with sympathy. How did you feel? She asked. I felt like a hot bath, I said. Thank you. Woo!
Thank you, Sarah. Next up, we have Jane Hargrave, and who's an artist and a writer based in Oakland, California. She has a particular interest in craft, ecology, and storytelling. She's currently working on, Dreamer's Ballet, a collection of illustrated short stories about dreaming, monsters, and connection. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you. Am I okay standing height? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I might be able to do it. Good? Hello. I'm working on a collection of stories. They are developing into taking place in different points in time. This one that I'm going to share from is in the current day, and there's not much you need to know. The stories are mostly about women operating in collection and community, and in this one, we find one of the characters by herself. She knew the sounds by heart, and they were there in her dreams, prismatic, textural, and annoying sometimes. An electric pulse of crickets and cicadas heaving like the forest was breathing. They always sounded to her like sound itself. They sounded like waves. When they were there in her dreams, she could feel their metallic buzzing, warm and loving, and would spend the following day believing that she had slept better because of it. After the waves and the buzzing, she dreamt of kerplunks into the pond and the singing of frogs, the chitter of a kingfisher gleefully complaining, and of the rippling reflections marching across water. She dreamt of the violence of it and the perishing life and disintegration of matter and the purity of the mud, and floating above the mud, burbling tremors, the stillness never really being still, and of tiny nightmarish creatures in the slime. She dreamt of the squawking of birds, of interruptions to the scene, a heron lurching awkwardly into the reeds, freezing and unfreezing while it hunted, and the rush of wings beating rotely in formation, a sound that was invisible until it was right on top of you. She dreamt of smells, of the sulfur and the pine and the grass, the smell of air and of the water floating in it, and the smell of wood swelling in humidity and of cotton slowly breaking down. In her dream, the horizon disappeared, and the sky wasn't really the sky anymore. There were only rings left over, rings of color and of sunlight and noises, and of mud and of her body and her hands forming circles. The rings of human vision, like around the eyes, hazy noses and edges of cheeks. Rings of the birds ruffling, of pigeon chatter and cooing bouncing out in big arcs. Clouds swirling gray and warm, and wide expanses of billowing air. She woke up to the rhythmic thudding of a shoe in a dryer, the neighbor's laundry bouncing toward her across the driveway. She rolled onto her back, exposing her belly to the ceiling beneath the blankets, and opened her eyes. She slid one hand to solar plexus, one to sacral chakra, just breathing like she had been taught. She imagined herself hovering over the floor and wavering like a magnet as she breathed in and out. Her sound competed with the traffic from outside, tapping on the windows and trying to get breathed in. But she couldn't remember what she had dreamed about. She was left with a memory of her feelings, like an imprint from a piece of bark. The flat feeling of maybe having missed something. And after the feeling of missing, she felt her anxiety hissing in the abdomen beneath her hands. Maybe she was just hungry. Or maybe she was mortally wounded but didn't know it. Maybe she was dying and had only a few months to live, in which case this entire project had been a huge waste of her time. Maybe she was just really, really worried about what would happen to her, what would happen to all of them, as the hours and days passed, with not enough directness, not enough feeling, not enough. To push the feeling away, she darted a hand out to grab her phone and tapped it open. Revving up the light and data, she opened the app, and a dull relief seeped into her as she watched a giant cardboard box being unsealed. Crinkly plastic pods of vacuum-sealed food were being loaded into a refrigerator. A woman explained in voiceover how difficult and exhausting her life used to be when she had to cook everything from scratch. Next, she swiped through a quiz to reveal what color foundation best complemented her skin tone. The result seemed like either olive or cool pink. Then she paused on a fundraising campaign, a guy from high school trying to raise $2,300. His dog needed a surgery. She watched two women younger than her smoothing rubbery patches into what they called the problem areas of their faces, and swiped to a scene of a tent encampment in the desert, a grid of white canvas tents. 3 teenage boys wore black track pants and tennis shoes, and she heard screaming in the distance, and they started to run. A missile dropped out of the sky in a perfectly straight line, blooming in a cloud of black ash and rocks that sputtered down onto the tents and to the people. She wondered if the boys were close enough to feel the heat on their faces, and then she realized her phone felt hot in her hands, and she wondered if her face maybe felt hot too, or if it was possible she might have a fever. She swiped to a beautiful woman in a cool, clean bedroom, in a soft monologue about glass skin, slowly peeling films of product off her face, and then a pop-up window blocked out her screen. A tiny golden bell emoji, and a text notification from a doorbell cam. Someone is at your front door. Although it wasn't really her front door in this house, it wasn't hers at all anymore, but in the months that had passed since she'd been here, in this bed, in this city, she had never deleted the app. Sometimes she just liked to watch the house, viewing the familiar rural landscape through her screen. It was just a field, boring and open and full of grass. But she liked to bask in its beige light and think about being there. So she curled over onto her side, and then she opened that app, peering out through the camera mounted at the property, yet another distant tendril of the internet. The digital feed wiggled in its frame, like ripples of heat, although she knew it was always a few degrees cooler out there, and that the air today would be sharp and inviting, and she saw the field and the pond out behind the old house, her old house, but no one was waiting at the front door. The camera had picked up on some movement. Maybe a finch was building a nest on the porch again. Then another rippling came into view, a little shadow moving off at the edge of the screen. That must be a fox, she thought, or a deer, spooked by nothing, darting across to find cover. She gazed loosely for a while before her eyes locked in. That wasn't a deer. She realized it was a person. She was watching a person running through the staticky void out beyond the house, sprinting as fast as they could. She breathed in sharply and sat up in bed.
Thank you so much, Jane. Next up, we have Patricia Zabayos, who is a writer, a former third grade teacher, and veteran homeschooling parent from Oakland. Forever obsessed with how people learn, her essays on the subject have appeared in Salon, Literary Mama, Mothering Magazine, and in a column at Home School Life magazine. She's at work on a mashup of memoir and cultural history exploring how much independence children have lost in the last 30 years and how, as a mother, she pushed back against that culture while also being shaped by it. Welcome, Patricia.
Hi. I'm going to read from midway in my manuscript from a chapter called Quisiera, which means I would like in Spanish. 2005, the year of this trip, the year I wrote my first draft of this essay, I wanted to get my work published. A few months later, in my first rejection letter, an editor wrote, "The essay might be better served by tying a series of scenes that capture observations within each scene and in dialogue between characters." Scenes? I had so much to learn about writing essays. Sure enough, that first draft did not start with the scene at the Prado. The 7 of us, the 3 kids, Chris, his parents, me, gazing at Las Meninas. That painting of the little princess in the big white dress that Lily loved. The artist Diego Velázquez himself right there in the painting. Sorting through this manila file folder now, stuffed with drafts, I see that the scene was not there at the start. 3 years after the trip, I rewrote the essay. 12 years after the trip, I rewrote the essay, and again I rewrote it after 15 years. In subsequent drafts, I pulled up the Prado scene and watched Velázquez himself step further into the light, inserting himself into my story, although I wasn't sure why. Meanwhile, my kids grew up, kept running and leaning and charging after their desires, eventually in cities far from our home in California. Over the years, 5 different writing teachers offered feedback on the essay. So many perspectives, I tried to hold them all at once. On the packets of drafts, my margin notes appear in a rainbow of colors, like the kids once used in their travel journals. My most recent draft is a complicated mess. Scenes, reflections, insights about Velázquez, about Spanish verb tenses. 19 years after the trip. Am I nuts to try again? Of course, if the essay is to fit into this manuscript, I'll have to weave in some sort of research about how motherhood, childhood, or education was shifting, stealing independence from kids. 2005, motherhood is what I Google. Up pops Perfect Madness by Judith Warner. Motherhood in the Age of Anxiety, the subtitle. A 2005 bestseller that I remember but did not read. This is a very personal book, Warner begins. It is a snapshot of motherhood, of parenthood really, as I found it in Washington, D.C. and its suburbs from the fall of 2000 to the summer of 2004. A snapshot. Like the scenes I learned to write in later drafts of this essay, as I looked back at my own motherhood in 2005. Some art historians liken Las Meninas to a snapshot, a moment captured in time, even a selfie with Velázquez there in the frame. At the time of the trip, what intrigued me was how Velázquez had chosen to center the little princess. A 5-year-old in an adult's world, an artist's studio, and he made her the painting's focus, with her sassy snub of what was being offered by the insistent lady-in-waiting, Menina, on her right. In 1656, the year generally attributed to Las Meninas, the Infanta Margarita was the Spanish monarch's only surviving child, so perhaps it made sense to portray her as powerful. Still, the way Velázquez captured that flash of independence, her chin tipped up, eyes locked on the viewer, he must have appreciated it. Immediately, I liked him. Warner says her book is an exploration of a feeling, that caught by the throat feeling so many mothers have today of always doing something wrong. I never felt that I was always doing something wrong as a mother. But looking at the drafts splayed before me, I see how this notion connects to my own snapshots, the something wrongness that will center itself as drafts and time unspool. A snapshot. My in-laws wanted dinner at 7:30, an impossibility in Madrid where people really do dine at 10 p.m. even on Tuesdays, so we found ourselves in a tapas bar open at all hours. We wrangled 7 stools and I set to work. Years of school Spanish made me the family translator despite the thick dark eyebrows on my father-in-law, my husband, which had already tricked several madrileños into addressing them in rapid Castilian. Yanking a Dress the Monkey sticker book from my bag of tricks for Theo, who was 3, along with my Spanish dictionary, I set my scope on the menu. I'd studied food vocabulary at home, but had already forgotten whether aceitunas were anchovies or olives. I did know they weren't tuna, and the kids wouldn't like anchovies, no way. But Theo and Lily, who was 9, would like olives, though Henry, 13, despised bitter foods, and I wasn't seeing anything with protein for my quasi-vegetarian kids who wanted nothing to do with those waxy hunks of jamón that looked like they'd been dangling in that window since this bar opened a few centuries earlier. And I really wanted to find something fast that would appeal to each kid because I didn't warn them ahead of time not to complain about the food in front of their grandparents, and I knew they were hungry, and I didn't understand why the potatoes had to be mixed up with setas, which I remembered were mushrooms, despicable as jamón, and anchovies, which might be aceitunas, so I caught Chris's eye and hissed, "Order sodas and get some bread!" I'd promised him the kids would be fine. Orange, Fanta, and House Red arrived, then the parade of little plates. Chris and his parents tipped back heads for slice after slice of jamon, too contented to notice that Theo had nibbled random bits from an entire bowl of aceitunas, confirmed to be olives, not knowing how to navigate pits. I'd rooted out a dish that all three kids scarfed down, tortilla, a Spanish sort of potato and egg frittata, silkened with loads of olive oil. Goal! I could eat plates of it myself, vegetarian that I am, but left most for the kids, relieved they were happy. Lily drew her princess in her journal, while Henry sketched a bird's eye view of our table in Picasso style. Cubist anchovies, fuchsia potatoes. I offered Theo a plastic Diplodocus, then a pack of Wiki sticks, then a tiny copy of Little Red Riding Hood, small as a playing card, trying to keep him occupied while holding my end of a conversation with my mother-in-law about another painting at the Prado, Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights. Earth, heaven, and hell in a triptych. We waited for the bill and waited for the bill while outside squid ink finally spread across the sky. I noted my mother-in-law bent over Lily's princess, asking questions, while my father-in-law teased Theo about the orange soda dribbled down his shirt, chucking Theo's chin when he looked down to see. Admiring Henry's Picasso still life, telling him how much I liked it, I noticed he'd given it a title, the letters obscured in his penciled tile wall. I wouldn't mention the title to Chris. Bad Dinner. That something wrongness. You might think an evening of keeping all the tapas plates spinning would have left me dizzy, exhausted. Instead, I remember being oddly energized, a feeling that only later I would come to question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll hear our last two readers and also do a quick Q&A. folks, welcome back. We're going to get started again with Michelle Ott. She's a visual artist and a writer working on Outer Space is Closer Than Antarctica, an illustrated memoir with science about the 4 seasons she spent working at McMurdo Station, Antarctica. Michelle's The Postcard Machine, possibly from the future, began in 2007 as a performance mail art project, and now she delivers a freshly illustrated postcard each month to subscribers. She lives and works in Northern California. Let's welcome Michelle.
Hi, y'all. Okay, I want to sit more. I hope I get super nervous. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Is this good? Okay. So, Outer Space is Closer Than Antarctica is the name of my book. It's highly illustrated, so I'm going to read you one chapter. Outer Space is, in fact, closer than Antarctica. So, this chapter is called Our Sun is a Very Average Star. It's chapter 8. Kelly wasn't sleeping. She was showing up for our 5 a.m. dishwashing shifts as bleary-eyed and exhausted as if she'd spent all night out at a bar. She told us that she insisted on leaving her windows uncovered all night long because she thought the light was so beautiful. I was shocked. Sleep is precious to me, and even during that first summer season, I was one of many who used blackout curtains on my windows during Antarctic summers to create a false night. But Kelly knew how precious the time in the light would be, and she didn't want to miss any of those moments. I loved this gesture. The sun doesn't set during the summer at McMurdo Station, so for 4 months a year, it's sunny 24 hours a day. After months of darkness, the sun slowly begins to rise in August, and by October, it moves through the sky in a ring shape overhead. For some Antarcticans, this constant daylight is a great joy, and for others, it's overstimulating. When we left Antarctica in 2005, I traveled in New Zealand with all of my new friends. Afterwards, I went to Oakland, California, Katie's hometown, to stay with her for a week. I got to see the place she grew up before I embarked on my trip across the country to move everything I left behind on the East Coast into a storage unit in the Midwest. In the kitchen of Katie's parents' house, I met her brother Chris, and she and I shared stories from our season at McMurdo. We talked about the sensation of the broad daylight at 2 a.m., how it feels special and inexplicable, but it is also a thing that simply happens on our planet. I thought out loud, some people might never experience 24 hours of daylight. Most people will never experience 24 hours of daylight, Michelle, Chris said. After our 2007 summer at McMurdo, Sean and I moved to Oakland. We didn't return to the ice the next season and haven't been back since. 5 years after we landed in Oakland, I started graduate school in nearby Berkeley, and after finishing in 2015, I learned that there was a science group at my university who had been to Antarctica for a long-duration balloon project. I emailed one of the research assistants and invited her out to coffee. McColl and I met at a cafe on Broadway in Oakland. She told me that our sun is a very average star. It just happens to be the star that's closest to us. I had never thought of the sun in this way. It is the star we see every day. It's the star we have direct access to. The sun is the center of our days and nights. We literally revolve around it. Yet here was someone talking about its ordinariness. She explained to me that the instruments on the long-duration balloon she worked with recorded solar flares and gave her information about sunspots. Here's an example of where the illustration would be. So during our conversation, Nicole made a small sketch for me of how they measure light from the sun when the instrument is in the air and how the blank spots, the more shadowy spots where the light isn't, tell us about sunspots and solar flares. This is a way to measure space weather. After hearing the words space weather for the first time, I became aware that weather seemed like such a human thing to me, as if we had to experience it for it to be considered weather. Like, does a sound exist if there's no one to hear it? Does weather exist if there is no one to be affected by it? I used to think the sun was a gigantic fireball, but the sun is plasma. It's not gas or liquid. Plasma is its own state of matter. I'm more familiar with the other three fundamental states of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. Perhaps I consider those three more knowable because I can relate to them physically. I can pick up a solid like a rock. My body contains several liquids at a time, and when I exhale, a gas comes out. So our sun is an average star made of plasma held together by gravity. Solar flares cause geomagnetic storms, and those storms can drive plasma from the sun towards the Earth's magnetic field. When the energetic particles in our magnetic field become activated, we can see them. We call them the aurora borealis and the aurora australis, also known as the northern and southern lights. The measuring and forecasting of space weather that McColl was talking about is one of the ways we can estimate the probability of seeing auroras on Earth. Like the Earth, the sun rotates, but since it's made of gas and plasma, different parts of the sun rotate at different speeds. It whirls faster at the equator and slower at its poles. This dynamic is called differential rotation. Fun fact, Jupiter and Saturn both show differential rotation as well. One of the ways that differential rotation has been observed is by tracking spots on the surface of the sun. The spots rotating at the equator are compared to the spots observed near the poles, revealing a difference in their rotation speeds. At the beginning of my conversation with McColl, I was preoccupied with the idea that what she was telling me was in direct contrast with what I thought and how I felt about the sun. I perceived it as something so metaphorically reliable, our center, that which we revolve around, the celestial body which defines our days and nights. But she taught me that it is physically unstable, changing, and fluid. By the end of our coffee break, she and I discovered that we had both met our boyfriends in Antarctica. Although there are many people who've met their partners in Antarctica, having this in common with a stranger felt auspicious to me, like the lucky break feeling of seeing a shooting star, an opportunity to make a wish. A sundog, also known as a parhelion, is a type of halo seen around the sun. The circular ring around the sun is broken on both sides with smaller images of the sun. The Greeks considered seeing a sundog to be a sign of good luck. For a sundog to be visible, there must be ice in the air, so although the phenomenon happens all over the world, the chances of seeing them are greater in Antarctica. There are other reasons being in Antarctica creates more opportunities to see sundogs, more hours of sun time, cleaner air, and the consistently colder climate, to name a few. When I have seen one, it has felt like seeing a rainbow, a spectacle worth stopping to witness. In 2005, 6 years after working with Kelly in the dish room, I returned to the same kitchen in a different role. This time I worked as an administrative coordinator in the office behind the bakery and kitchen. I tracked all the production records, processed payroll, and served as the point of contact for the galley. During this season, a windfly, which began in late August at the end of the austral winter and ended at the start of the summer season in October, the window of light would grow by 20 minutes per day. When I arrived at the end of August, there was a 3-hour window of light. I missed Sean during this season, spending 6 weeks of cold darkness alone in the place where we had fallen in love. Each afternoon, I would leave my office behind the bakery section of the kitchen, head into the service area, and go look out the windows to get some light into my eyes. Sean's contract wouldn't begin until October, so we spent a few months corresponding by email and phone. Although it was my 3rd season, it was only my 2nd time working in the kitchen. Returning to the kitchen after 6 years, I noticed the DAs were wearing black kitchen pants, a change from the standard issue staff uniform I had during my time in the dish pit. My job description as a dining attendant in 1999 explained that I would be supporting the cooks and kitchen crew by refilling the food and drinks during meal times, washing some dishes, tidying the kitchen and dining room, and assisting with food preparation and service. It sounded easy, almost like being a host at a restaurant, compared to some of the jobs I had done up to that point, cleaning hotel rooms, making sandwiches at a deli, or working in the dish room at the dorm where I lived during my year at the University of Minnesota. Before deployment to McMurdo, we all visit the Clothing Distribution Center in Christchurch, New Zealand, to try on the Antarctic-issued extreme cold weather gear and clothing. You're issued 2 orange bags filled with clothing assigned to you for travel in Antarctica, including special garments that might be necessary for your specific job. Many Antarcticans get Carhartts, specialized wind gear, or other unique clothing with high performance features. The very first time I entered the dressing room at the CDC, it was full of other women who were also bound for McMurdo, but I hadn't formally met any of them yet. I was en route to Antarctica for my first season, and it felt like everyone else in the room had more experience than me. When I unzipped the industrial-sized zipper on my first orange bag, a zigzag of houndstooth popped out from the overstuffed canvas sack. As I pulled the fabric out, I blurted, "Oh my God, these are amazing." And I held the wild patterned fabric against my body in an initial fit check to reveal a pair of men's pants made of a woven houndstooth fabric. For me to do my job in the kitchen, the United States Antarctic Program deemed a pair of men's kitchen pants a specialized tool. The fabric, softened from years of being worn by my predecessors, had a fuzz-like nap to it. The black of the houndstooth faded to a dark metal gray. Several people looked over to see what I was making a fuss about. Most of them who saw the pants knew immediately that I was about to wash dishes, pots, and pans for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and that repetitive motion injuries were likely in my future. They turned back to testing out their work clothes. The woman sitting across from me looked at me with a knowing smile and said, "You're going to have a great season, honey."
These books are fantastic. I can't wait to read all of them. We'll finish up with Stephany Joy Ashley. She's a writer, organizer, and advocate living in San Francisco. Stephany was introduced to the labor movement as a member of the Exotic Dancers Union and grew up politically under the tutelage of harm reduction and HIV activists. She is the past president of the Harvey Milk LGBT Democratic Club, the former executive director of the St. James Infirmary, a co-founder of the Transgender Cultural District, and a former legislative aide to District 9 Supervisor David Campos. Her forthcoming novel, Locomotion, is a love letter to San Francisco and a journey through the magical realism of our survival mechanisms. Let's welcome Stephany.
All right. Hi, everybody. Do I want to sit? Do I want to stand? All right. So this is the opening of my novel. Ruth Hazel Wilder, born 1902, died 1930. The train struck so fast, with such force, that I didn't even feel pain when it took me down. Pain would come after what I felt, which was a blow so sudden that it was as if God's own hand had furled itself into a fist and smashed through my body, past my body, exploding my very existence into pieces, a glittering aftermath on the tracks. Pain would come later, a momentary trespasser, barely significant. I waited for it and waited for it, ready for some flood to overtake me, but all I felt was absence. Not pain, just absence, as though I had been jettisoned from something. Pain was the body clinging to its place here, fighting for its connection to life. I was floating, untethered now. Funny, I remember thinking, what an inconsequential part of all this the pain is, when it's the part I always feared the most. I had been reaching in the moment right before it happened, reaching for the edge of the door so I could swing myself up, and away into the boxcar, as I'd done so many times with Teddy and with my lover Sarah, as I had just begun to do alone. But as I reached, something below me caught, and the train ate at it hungrily, pulling me down with it, yanking me beneath the car that rattled over me like a storm cloud full of clanking bones, my bones. The train was devouring me, chewing me up and spitting me out. But then the bone storm passed, and the train was gone, and all around me was stillness. A crow hopped beside me, balancing its long feet on the edges of the rail, tilting its head sideways and watching me with black pearls for eyes, universes of eyes which I now entered. The quiet that came after the train passed was unlike any quiet I'd ever known. as if it had sucked in all the sounds, all the noise of the world around it, and carried it away in its great steel belly. I lay there by the side of the tracks where my body had been tossed aside, and I realized with a tremendous relief that I was glad I was not on the train with all the noise, all the coming and going, and all the stuff that gets brought along the way. I felt the great silence, and then I felt something else, a buzzing, coming from somewhere beneath me and all around, and then it was coming from within me too. The sound of all the ants on the planet, and the crickets and the hummingbirds, the millions of them with their thrumming wings. I felt the fish darting together in schools through the sea, and the blooming of mushrooms cracking through the bark of fallen trees. I heard the sound of life exhaling itself across the planet, and with this great exhale, I was released and held together in concert with all else. In this manner, I stay, swirling and circulating for decades that I no longer bother to count. I reconstitute myself from time to time, ghost-like. But death is not entirely free from seeking. I was human once after all. In my better moments, moments that can last for years, I can let go. But even the dead grasps sometimes. And sometimes I still reach back, memory pulling stronger than any train. But enough about the dead for now. Let's talk about the living. On the streets of San Francisco, the rain made stains, turned every nickel of spit and crumple of trash into something even more shapeless, the boundaries between object and environment softening. The low fog smudged out any edge there once was between the gray sky and the silver sea, merging water and air until the horizon vanished. Even the bridges that cut sharp lines and angles so cinematically were disappeared today. A person could wonder if their actions even mattered on days like today, days with so much disappearance. Mattering was a question all too familiar to the senator. He alternated often between wanting reminders of his relevance and wanting it obfuscated entirely, but the city offered mostly unsatisfying in-betweens. He'd been around too long to go unnoticed, traded enough favors to have his own name emblazoned on public spaces. But he had also been around too long to be registered as anything other than artifact. Someone who had done great things for people who needed a champion, but those people were gone now. Someone who had once been a great kingmaker, and queenmaker too, with a flurry of women around him that he elevated into positions of power. Women who flirted and fawned over him, an endless string of lunch dates in booths with curtains that the servers closed dutifully. But those women had their own legacies now, and entertained him out of something that felt too close to pity to offer him any pleasure. So it was when the senator walked into the coffee shop where he had bought his coffee for decades and was greeted by the barista as usual with, "Good morning, Mr. Senator." Despite retiring from his seat more than 2 decades ago, the title still stuck to him wherever he went. The coffee shop was filled with tourists seeking shelter, Midwesterners who wore their shorts and sandals to visit sunny California, huddled now in overpriced sweatshirts bought out of desperation at the souvenir shop as the damp and cold marine layer wrapped itself around them. The senator paid for his coffee with cash, and the barista made a face full of patronizing charm as he spun the credit card machine around and fumbled for change. "Keep it," said the senator, stepping aside for the next customer. The next customer was a young blonde with jeans wet to the knees beneath a childish raincoat. Her face was wholly dough-like, with watery brown eyes and pillowy lips that curved into a smile quickly and easily. The barista said something to her, and she laughed in a jingly way one might call a giggle, if that was a thing a grown woman, was she? Grown? Could do. She paid for her drink and answered her phone, excitedly exhaling words to whoever was on the other line. They reached for their drinks in succession, and the senator held the door for her as she exited, lifting her eyebrows in his direction as a thank you. He followed the sound of her voice, dialing into her sing-songy rhythm, and let it carry him up the street, away from the bay, and into the cresting hill of Broadway, where the bars and the clubs all ready to open their doors. Her voice was exhilarating. It hushed and erupted in receipt of every reveal the storyteller on the other end fed her. It lulled in kittenish understanding and then turned sharp corners of opinion. He did not tune into the words or keep track of the message, but but he listened to it like a song as he walked one foot in front of the other and let the sidewalk, wet with rain, pass beneath him. She turned a corner and stepped into the doors of a theater, her voice disappearing into the carpeted foyer. He paused at the doorway and looked up at the sign, the neon outline of a naked woman which danced back and forth between two positions, arms above her head, hips to the right, arms by her side, hips to the left. He recognized the theater as one of those places that exist quietly in a city's background for decades, everyone, including the customers, pretending it doesn't exist. In this pretending, securing an endurance most other businesses never find. In prior years, it would have been suicide for him to set foot in such a place, but no one knew him here, and no one really cared now, did they? He missed her voice. He stepped inside. The carpet sunk beneath his shoes, wet soles scrubbing themselves against the deep red fiber patterned with gold paisley that had long ago turned brown. Mirrored walls held shelves full of DVDs, where naked men and women contorted on their covers below titles screaming their themes. A soda machine stood lit up by the entrance, and a girl in a long robe fed it $1 and bent down to retrieve a Coca-Cola that the machine gave her with a thud. She tapped the top of the can with 2 plastic fingernails and walked into the hallway on stilt-like shoes. The senator took all this in from the doorway, unsure how to move his feet forward. Soon enough, another man bumped him, passing by him quickly with a billed hat pulled down low, approaching a front desk with 2 attendants and sliding them a 20, which they returned to him in a stack of singles. The sounds of doors swinging open and slapping shut came from all directions. The sounds of machines digesting dollar bills layered on top. The sounds of muffled voices and laughter and music filled in the percussion. He just now noticed the music. And suddenly, the sound of a godlike, girlish voice came over a loudspeaker, bellowing through the halls. "Come on in, the water's fine." The senator looked around him to find the source of the voice, the same voice he had followed here. "Around the corner, private pleasures," one of the 2 guys at the front desk interjected, then pointed in the direction to the left of the hallway. "First time here?" The senator nodded. "Check out booth 3 for our senior and disabled customers." The senator furrowed his brow, but followed the finger of the young man, unsure of his other options. He pulled out his wallet and lifted a 20 from it, as he'd seen the previous man do. The front desk guys eyeballed him, sizing up what he was unsure of. "Just put the whole 20 in, man." He nodded and headed to booth 3.
Thank you so much, Stephany, and to all the readers. I also just want to give a quick thank you to Liza Gleason and Patricia Zabayos for helping to organize this reading and the reading that we had last week. And then we'll do a Q&A. So if all the readers want to come on up, how does that sound? Yeah, come on up. And then Liza's in the back. She's going to check if anyone on Zoom has questions. Does anyone have a question in the audience that wants to get started? Yeah. Please.
I have a question. I'm sorry, I forgot. Yes. Jane. In the piece that you were reading, it really, it resonated so much as, the kind of, soft bed thoughts that you have, and I loved that it took maybe 7 minutes to read, but it felt like a collapsed time of it could have been 60 seconds. Did you have a time frame in mind, or was it just a space, a mental space? Are you imagining that happened in a certain amount of time?
Not particularly. I have many pages of those swipes that have been written, and they will be placed in different positions, I think. And I think for for the chunk that I read, I think that felt like the right amount to sort of get. It was sort of the right size for the being the middle to kind of get her from being asleep to waking up.
Yeah.
But I think that the collapsing of time and also the collapsing of seriousness with which with any of us, but like with which that character is absorbing information, I think gets very slippery in the different things that she's doing. So I think, yeah, it felt like that was enough to kind of give the sense of that, like, time was losing a little bit of meaning, I think, in the bedtime. Yeah.
Liza, are there any questions?
There's a couple here. The first one is also for Jane. And it says, well, first of all, just congratulations, Barry and Parakeet. Thanks for organizing this event. And then this says, Jane, what inspired you to title your book? Is there a dancer in your book?
Oh, I forgot about the title of the book. The title of the book is like the title that I've been working with since the very beginning of the ideas forming. I don't think now maybe it will be the title of the book the past like month or so. It's sort of been the working title that I assumed I will replace. But the dancing aspect, there is not one dancer, but there's in one of the stories there's some like group dancing that takes place, and then also some dream sequences about dancing. So dancing that's not necessarily happening in real life, but that people are fantasizing about, and the fantasy of dancing in unison with other people has been a theme. The characters aren't necessarily experiencing the unison when they're awake, but they're in a sort of ballet when they're asleep. So that was sort of the idea, but I don't know if it'll be the title.
And then there's also a question for Stephany here. It says, Stephany, what an incredible opening to your book. Why 1903 to 1936? Is there something that happened in history during that time?
Busted. No. There is a, well, is that true? Okay. That particular Ruth's character, no. The answer is no. No. There's some San Francisco history that will overlay that, but literally those were, no. Random dates. Sorry.
I don't know if everybody wants to answer it, but what was the most exhilarating part of this journey for each of you? Whether it was writing or reading or, any of it.
I'll say something. For me, I've been writing by myself for such a long time. And so every month we'd get together and we would have one call where it'd be all 45 of us. And then either later that day or the next day, we'd have just 15 of us on a smaller call. And especially the smaller calls, which a lot of, some of these people are in my little small group, just seeing those same people month after month. And Beth asks, we have to each talk for 3 minutes on some topic. And I don't know, it was just really incredible to be in the process of writing along with other people, and then also getting to meet them here and all of these things too. But that was pretty powerful for me.
I think for me it was, I'm a visual artist, and I knew I wanted to write this book, but having everyone else to bounce off of who also like do so many different kinds of works was encouraging, because I thought, at least I can write all the garbagey stuff, and seeing it actually take shape over the course of the year and be like, oh, this is more what I really want to say. Like I'm actually able to do that was really kind of like intoxicating. Yeah.
Like Patricia, I think I was just shocked by what a difference it made to have community. I'm in communities, but I haven't necessarily felt like they were for me. And that was really different and so supportive. And it made me realize that it's absolutely a non-negotiable for a writing life. The other thing is that I would have given up. Like, this is not exactly what you're asking, but like, I would have stopped writing the book like 100 times. But because of Parakeet and because each month there was a new goal and a new counter that started, and everyone would just listen to you cry or bitch or whatever, and then they'd be like, okay, keep going, and then you did, and that was actually kind of amazing. So it's like all the things you think are true are actually true about accountability and community. So that was wonderful.
I mean, I think there were so many exhilarating moments. Like, the very first thing Beth had us do was start saying, I'm a writer, like introduce ourselves as a writer. She was like, and for a while, I would only do it when I was on airplanes making small talk, because I was like, well, this person doesn't know the truth, so it's okay if I lie to them and tell them I'm a writer. But like, that was exhilarating and terrifying. And then also like, the moment when I realized I had amassed, like the moment I printed out my manuscript for the first time and it was like this big, and I was like, oh, that's like, that was really exhilarating, It's a first draft. It's really big. Yeah, big book energy. And then, yeah, I mean, this was exhilarating too. Like other people have said, to sort of be toiling away at something in private, like all year, and then share it. It's very exhilarating.
I actually have a quick question. I would love to hear anything that you want to talk about transformation you experienced over the year, whether it's in your writing or with yourself.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
A question that will go well with that.
Oh, perfect.
And so thinking forward, like transformation, then what is your greatest sort of wish or hope for your book?
My biggest transformation over the course of the year was just in the follow through, I think, kind of that everyone's describing. I feel like I finally consider this to be a legitimate project, and it took a lot of like work and like help. I think this specifically, the way the program has been designed, I think there's a legitimacy making, which has been sort of part of it. My hope for my book is just to complete it like fully, which also was just like a funny pipe dream, I think, before the program. It seems pretty reasonable that it could maybe happen at this point, which feels good.
I think the transformation for me was that there can be really intense, focused work, and then like long periods where I feel like I'm not working, and then checking back in on it with other people. And like sometimes it's in the zeitgeist and everyone feels that way. And sometimes it's okay to take a big break, even if it's a big project that you need to like make progress on. That was really transformative to me, instead of just like having really small milestones. Because for me, I had some big like summertime where I couldn't work and it just like wasn't happening. And I had kind of surrendered to the process of writing and was like, okay, this is a new process to me. I have to kind of like listen to that. And then wait, what was the second part of? Your hope for your book. Oh, my hope. Oh, my hope is that my book shares tremendous and small delights with people.
My transformation was that I had to get over myself. Like I used to use fear as just a thing to keep me from doing things. And I would write in secret and I would never share anything and I would never talk about it. And I would just and I'd be like, I'm so serious and that's why I can't share this with anyone. And I just couldn't do that anymore. And it was so healthy. It was so healthy to just come out and be like, I'm sad, I suck. No, things are good. Now it's great. Now everybody gets it. And I just, that was huge for me. I just didn't realize how much I was keeping my process secret and waiting until I had a perfect thing. It was just a function of perfectionism, I think. So coming out with my process was very transformative. And then my wish, I want everybody to get published. That's my wish for me and for everybody else. And I also want to read these books. They sound so great. So that's it.
I had a big transformation, and I have some friends here. My husband's here. I was working on an earlier version of this memoir for 8 years, and the way I would do it is I would keep writing certain chapters over and over and over again. And I think part of that was me learning to write and my writing getting better, but I just I couldn't move forward. And so when I started with Parakeet, about a year ago, I decided to bring in the research element because I didn't want it to be a straight up memoir anymore. So I started the book all over. And that's when I started Parakeet. And I thought, I'm going to write a draft of a chapter every month. And at the end of the month, if I'm not done, I'm going to the next chapter, which I've never done before. And what was amazing about that is the book started to teach me what it wanted to be in a way that it never got to teach me that before. And so when I was halfway through the year, it's oh God, now I get how to write this book, and I'll go back to the beginning and have to redo that a little bit. But that's been huge for me. So I have 3 more chapters to write. I've never been this close to the end of this book. I'm so excited. So that's my hope, is to get to the end of it. And then also, like Sarah said, I'm so excited to read all of these books and see them out in the world. Are there any other? Did everyone go? Did you?
So I know I got one. Similarly, getting out of my own way and then letting the book teach me things about it. I've never spent so much time in my imagination. And I knew I wanted to write fiction. I knew I wanted to write a novel because I love novels, more than anything. But I've never just let myself writing a novel is so unhinged. You're just I can literally make anything happen, anything. And it was wild, and it felt totally reckless and out of control and exhilarating. And then at a certain point, I was the characters started to tell me things and do things. And the character that narrates the opening in the first person, that character was not a ghost, was not an ancestor, was not dead when I started writing the book. And about halfway through, I was oh my God, she's dead. She's been trying to tell me she's dead. She's totally not even alive during this decade. And that was so cool to be I don't know, when you can let go, how much you can learn from just the creative process. And then my hope for the book is it's actually it's a magical realism book about dissociation. And so my hope is that it will be a little bit of a roadmap for people to kind of find their way back home to the present.
Does anyone? Oh, yeah.
I have a question. I'm going to really work on just dumbing down this incredible event a little bit, because I am really curious about the Real Housewives of Antarctica. And are you and Sean still together?
Is the Real Housewives of Antarctica a thing?
No,
Oh, okay. You made it up. Because I was like, because this is what happens when you start telling people about things and then they tell you, you're like, what? I like was talking to the geographers that I've been working with, and I told them something, and they're like, we've never heard of that. And I'm like, it's a geographic term. It's called a desire path. What do you mean? And it's like this funny thing. Sean and I are still together. He drove me here tonight. Yes, the book has more of a love story. That chapter, it was like just a little bit. And as far as the Real Housewives, I don't know.
No, it's really just about you and Sean.
Yeah, yeah. No, yep. We celebrated our 20th anniversary November 1st.
Nice.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
2004 was when we met, yeah.
Any other questions? No. Do any of you have questions? Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you, Bird and Beckett. And hopefully we see everyone's books on the shelves.
Thank you all. I brought you guys pencils. I brought you a present.